I'll turn it right on over to you, Tom.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. It's still 2020, and happy 100th anniversary to League of Women Voters. And I talked to a lot of people that want 2020 to just be over. Like, this has been a really hard year for every one of us in varying ways. And so I just want to acknowledge that. Heidi and I have known each other for several years, and she's been always gracious to invite me and include me on many of the league functions. And so I'm trying to do the best I can, even though she's not technically in my state rep district. I still recognize that as an elected official here in the Northwest suburbs, and by the way, there's a lot of overlap. My district is primarily Palatine, but I also have pieces of Arlington Heights, Rolling Meadows, Inverness, North Hoffman Estates, Barrington, and a little tiny corner of Schaumburg. But because there's so much overlap, because of school, district overlays, and work and friendships and familial relationships, there's a lot of overlap. And so I have no problem participating in things like this, even if it's not to my specific constituents. And besides, like Heidi said, we really need desperately for more engagement and involvement in the civic process. I should answer her question. So how did I decide to get involved? I grew up in a home. So I grew up in Glenview. I've been a suburbanite almost my entire life. And I had parents who were very patriotic. They loved this country. My dad was in the Air Force, and I had a grandfather who was in the Army during World War I and World War II. I had an uncle who was career Navy. I had a cousin who was in the Navy and actually lost his life in the Navy. So I grew up in a home where it was kind of drilled into us that this is a very special country. We are unique in world history and in present day times. There are still millions of people who would risk their lives to come to this country for the opportunities that we have, for the freedoms that we have. Is this a perfect country? No. But what we have is very, very special. And self-government requires civic engagement, civic involvement. Benjamin Franklin said right around the time that the Constitution was ratified in 1789, someone asked him, so are we going back to a monarchy? Do we have a republic? He said, we're giving you a republic if you can keep it. Meaning, here's what self-government is going to require. It's going to require all-in engagement and involvement. And if you don't, it could easily be lost. And so here we are, 240 plus years later, and are we going to keep it or not? 240 years roughly from the revolution, but then the Constitution's 231 years old. So this is going to require our engagement and involvement. And one thing that has concerned me is that a lot of people have just kind of checked out. While this last election had very, very high voter turnout historically, you still had a big chunk of society that just said, I'm not going to vote. My vote won't matter and count. Here in Illinois, we have a unique set of challenges from rampant public corruption. And it's not just new. I mean, it's been around for well over a century. I was watching a PBS documentary about the history of Chicago. And back in the 1800s, they were talking about corruption. So it's probably human nature that if there are ways to exploit the system, then those who will, who have no qualms about that are gonna do it. So there are checks and balances that we have in the system, but there are also, if there are loopholes, we need to find them, we need to correct them. One of the things that I've been very proud to work on with the league and with other good government groups is that we need to have a fair maps system. We should not have the politicians every 10 years drawing up the district lines that would favor the party in power. And in Democratic states, the Democrats in charge do it. In Republican-led states, the Republicans do it. I think the idea is to move toward an state of Iowa model where you have an independent commission that's drawing those lines, so that you don't have every 10 years this fight over which incumbents are we going to protect and which party are we going to protect. And before the Zoom call started, Heidi and I were talking about how if we had more robust elections in every single district, not just the 10 or 20 that are targeted for that time, but if every single election, individuals who wanted to run for office felt like they had a real chance, I think that would be good for the system. So why did I decide to get involved? I talked about my background. My parents were always, really interested in issues. We talked about these things when I was a swimmer, when I was growing up. And so my dad and I would talk about issues on the car drive to practice. Wouldn't get into really heavy stuff necessarily, but my parents were interested and involved, and I kind of acquired that as well. Fast forward a few years, I started to volunteer on a few campaigns. I wanted to help elect people that I thought were capable and competent and had integrity, who agreed with issues that I agreed with. So I started out as a volunteer, and then fast forward another 10 years or so, some people said to me, you should run for one of these offices. And I thought, well, am I qualified? I mean, a lot of the people I knew who were involved in politics or as candidates were lawyers. And I found out that, no, you don't have to have a law degree or be a practicing lawyer to run for one of these offices. In fact, while you should have some lawyers involved because they know the law, they've studied the law, but if you really want a robust vetting of some of these issues, then you want people from all walks of life serving in the legislature, serving in Congress, serving on village councils, because they're bringing that perspective to the public policy process. And so having farmers, business people, teachers, people in law enforcement, having a variety, doctors, scientists, having a variety of those people in these positions of authority mean when the bills get vetted, you're going to have those different perspectives that are coming in. The right questions are going to be asked, rather than just people with a very, very narrow life experience, frankly. And that also comes to people from different demographics, like Heidi talked about, having people in these offices that look like the general society. That's a good thing. And so socioeconomically, and just if someone has the right reasons for running, having them in this position is, I think, a good thing. So I actually taught fifth grade for 6 years, and my first trip to Springfield was as a chaperone for students. And so that was kind of eye-opening, like, oh, wow, I'm here in the state capitol. How many of you have actually been to Springfield before? Okay, most of you. All right. Well, my first trip down was, I think in 2002 or 2003. But anyway, I was blown away that 8 years later, I was actually getting sworn in to serve as a representative. And so I'm happy to take questions. By the way, I would rather answer questions than just pontificate. So that's my background. That's kind of my philosophy about what I try to bring to the table. I try to meet with different groups. I try to read, whether they agree with me or not. I want to know what their perspective is. I try to read as much as possible. I go through at least 3 newspapers a day and several magazines a week just to know. And I'm not always reading people that I agree with. I want to hear, what is the other side? What's the other argument? So that I am as best as possible when I'm voting on an issue or speaking on an issue. I try to have a broad perspective on these issues. So with that, why don't I open it up to some questions? And you can ask me pretty much anything. You can ask me about running for, like, what's it actually like in a campaign? What is it actually like being in office? What are some of the issues that you face? What's your daily What does your daily schedule look like? I'm happy to take any of those questions.
How did you like do it? Did you need like signatures, or like did you just like go there and be like, I want to be a representative?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so some of these positions have a 2-year term, some have a 4-year term, some have a 6-year term. Every single office holder, and by the way, there is something that all of you could do that is the lowest level of elected office. Now, wait, well, first I should ask, are you all in Cook County, or are there some that are outside of Cook County?
I think
Or
we're all Cook County.
if you're outside Cook County, raise your hand or speak up.
We're all in Cook County.
Oh, you're all in Cook County. Okay. So Cook County is a different animal. But outside of Cook County, there's something called precinct committeeman, which is actually an elected position. You are elected to represent your respective party in your precinct. And it actually takes a minimum of 10 signatures to get on the ballot. And now in Cook County, these positions are appointed by the different parties, but as I travel the state and I talk to different people, you know, someone will say, well, I'm a precinct committeeman, and they actually ran for that position within their precinct. Okay. But anyway, here in Cook County, you could actually serve as a precinct committeeman or committeewoman, and you're serving the constituents within your precinct. You're helping them in terms of voter registration. You could help them with providing information on all the different candidates. You could help people with their early voting or vote by, you know, absentee. Beyond that, though, you start having positions like village council, library board, park district board, community college board. So there's all kinds of different elected positions, and state statute dictates how many signatures you need to be a qualified candidate. So at least for the state legislature, you have to be at least 21 years old. You have to live in the district that you want to represent. You have to live there for at least 2 years. And then you need a minimum of 500 signatures to get on the ballot. Again, that's state legislature. For village council, it might only be 100 signatures. Back in the day when people took the train to work or took the train to school, you'd often see candidates or their volunteers working the train station, because there's just so many voters all in one location in such a compressed time period, and you can rapidly get signatures. But that's essentially how you get your name on the ballot. You have to have people in that district who say, yeah, I'm willing to give you a chance, or I'm willing to vote for you as my whatever, my office holder. Yes? Who's that? Bridget.
Hi. I just would like to start talking about CJA. So from my coursework the past 4 years, it's pretty evident that policies like CJA are the only way to move forward for a prosperous future for everyone. And I think there's some really good tenets of the bill, like renewable energy and carbon-free energy. So I was just curious, what about the bill are you not supportive of, or would you change?
Well, so does everybody know what CJA is? Okay, Clean Energy Jobs Act. I can't, some have their cameras off. There are some questions I have about mandating the generation of certain forms of energy, because there are going to be consequences one way or another. And I think we should look at other states, we should look at other countries to see what their experience is on the issue before we just decide, well, they've done it, we should do it too. So one recent example, by the way, is California. You can look at to see California move toward these policy goals. years before us. And this past summer, there were rolling blackouts because, you know, for a variety of things. Hold on, let me turn this off. Not disturb. Okay. When, you know, so renewables, they do not provide a consistent base load of power. And that's the biggest obstacle that we're facing, or that renewables face, is that when you absolutely need the lights to be on, when you absolutely need to power hospitals, schools, society as a whole, you cannot rely on renewables. And so mandating it basically puts a state into that kind of box where their choices are limited. So I'm all in. I want as many different sources of energy as the market can, as the market wants.
Okay, yeah. So I just think, are there possibly other ways that the California blackouts could have been attributed to? Maybe not the renewable energy, because I know I spent time in Scotland studying there, and they have one of the most prosperous and successful wind energy industries, and they have no problem at all with blackouts. There's also other countries like Denmark that are having really successful ventures with this new type of energy. And I just think of things like you mentioned, it's totally true that whatever we invest in, there will be drawbacks and there will be benefits. But I think you could draw the same conclusion with coal and fracked gas, that there are also benefits and also a lot of consequences. So it's kind of thinking about that, but in a different context for energy.
And I would recommend, there's a great documentary that was on Channel 11 a few years ago called Power to the People. And they did a dive into I think it was 8 different forms of energy generation and the pros and cons of each one. And I don't know if that's still available online or if you can check it out, but it's called Power to the People. So, but I mean, what's unique about Scotland, what's unique about Denmark, I mean, they're much smaller countries. There's also a coastal aspect that they have that the United States, how do you provide power to the center of the country? There's also environmental issues. So the, I can't remember the name of the group, but it might've been the American Bird Conservatory. But anyway, they talked about, you know, just some of the environmental impacts of wind, for example. You want to place these turbines in areas that are windy, you know, it makes sense. I mean, because otherwise they're not going to generate the amount of electricity needed. Well, as it turns out, migratory birds also are flying those paths because they save energy. I mean, that's going back however many, you know, thousands or however many years these birds have been flying these paths, because that's how they save their bodily energy. And it just so happens that they fly right into the paths of these industrial wind farms, and it causes tremendous environmental damage there. Endangered species and just else.
Yeah, just a quick point on that. For the past 2 years, I was a TA for an environmental energies, like a bioproducts, biosystems engineering class on renewable energy. And that is true, but far more birds die from flying into windows than wind turbines. So just to put context there for that.
I would also like to jump in. I did a nationally winning project in middle school on this issue, and wind turbines are such a small percentage of these bird deaths that cities, in comparison, are one of the greatest threats. Although at the same time, this is a pretty small issue in comparison to the major thing that CJ would be addressing, which is climate change. And while I really appreciate your point that you were talking about that, you know, clean energy is where the market is moving, and that is a positive. I think what really needs to be thought of here is the way in which CEJA is going to address our futures as young leaders and as young people, and that climate change is affecting our lives very personally and will affect our lives in the future. And those drawbacks that are coming directly from fossil fuels and fracking and other environmentally damaging practices, they're much greater, in my personal opinion, than any benefits or drawbacks to the renewable energy grid standing by itself, when that is going to be helping us reverse the effects of climate change. And I just wonder what your thoughts on that, not on the market or on the economic feasibility of renewable energy and whether or not that is true, but what you think the importance of climate change is, and in terms of the CEJA bill, how you think that this bill can help move us forward on that particular issue.
Well, again, Illinois is one of 50 states. And in terms of the world, I mean, one thing I learned in earth science back in high school is we're spaceship Earth, right? So what happens in one part of the world in terms of the atmosphere is going to impact the rest of the planet. And so if Illinois moves down this road, but other states don't, other countries don't, I don't trust that that China is, while they may have some projects here or there, I don't believe that they are moving in this direction environmentally, nor other third world countries or second world countries. I mean, to ignore the economics of it or to ignore how other countries or states respond to it just puts Illinois in a very, very detrimental position. Yeah.
Like to pipe in there. China actually just came out with an article. Bloomberg just came out with an article about China saying that China has just committed to going net zero by 2060. So they are already in their process to going towards renewable energy, completely renewable energy. And just as you said, Tom, we are spaceship Earth. And I am just curious on how you think that Illinois can be a leader. I think it would be something we'd all like to be proud of, to be Illinois residents, is being in a place that supports clean energy. And the opposite of clean energy is dirty energy. And dirty energy is something that from fossil fuels makes living near fossil fuel, related plants or other kind of fracking environments very harmful to the people around who live around there. And I'm just curious, how do you feel that as Illinoisans we can be proud of living somewhere that doesn't create a livable environment, a genuinely livable environment for those who live around us, and as we can contribute to the larger global society?
Well, nuclear energy remains a big component of the electricity that Illinois generates. And so I'm more than happy to have nuclear power in this state. We have to figure out what to do eventually with the waste. And I'm also excited to see what might be down the line in terms of other kind of nuclear technologies that are a lot safer. Fusion, for example, rather than fission. And also, what's the experience of other countries like France that have figured out a way to reprocess the nuclear waste so that they're getting much more out of the fuel than we are in this country.
I think that's a very good point, and nuclear energy is both a very divisive and important topic. However, with CEJA and with the future of clean energy, I just think it's also really important to think about, although every type of renewable energy has benefits and drawbacks, and I've studied many of these, aspects like geothermal, having a little bit of cold, solar energy, wind energy, turbine energy, all of these things have the capacity to produce amounts of energy with significantly smaller environmental drawbacks than fossil fuels and fracking and nuclear energy, as well as nuclear energy being a hazard to humans. I think that when you were talking about, all of these types of energy not being reliable, I personally don't see that in the way that I've studied it. I'd like to hear why you think that types of energy like solar or wind or geothermal or turbine energy don't have the capacity to be reliable in the same way that fossil fuels are, and why you think that is a cornerstone to your decision on CEJA.
Well, in regards to solar, I mean, you can only generate electricity when the sun is shining. So that's one. And likewise, wind turbines when the wind is blowing. So, I mean, that's the limitation of both of those energy sources.
Okay, that's a perfectly valid point. There are a lot of types of technology moving forward to more effective versions of wind turbines and solar power energy, but geothermal, for instance, is a type of energy that, first of all, has no significant drawbacks other than the manufacturing and transport of geothermal technology. It's built underneath our houses. It works all of the time. It's been turned into closed loop systems that perfectly work in like managing your heat and your electricity in houses. And so this is just an example, but what I'm really asking here is, why do you think that moving forward into this technology, which has a lot of scientific basis and has a lot of potential is not as important as the potential of fossil fuel energy, and why you think that we can't make this change that seems to have these scientific benefits that for everyone?
Well, I mean, back to geothermal, if that's being done for new construction, that's totally different than our existing cities and suburbs and infrastructure that we have right now. So the question is, how do you pay for something like that with the existing infrastructure that we have when we already, and remember, we're not in a vacuum here. A state like Illinois has, I know we're not talking about pensions, but it's part of the conversation because another environmental aspect has to do with lead pipes. And so there are areas of the city of Chicago, you want to talk about, making the environment safer for the citizens who live here, for people who are struggling. How do we pay for just the replacement of these lead pipes? Okay, so instituting all these different new energy sources that we're talking about, or the building out the infrastructure, it's nearly impossible to do at the same time we have these other legacy problems that we are trying to address that are just as relevant to the public conversation.
Okay, I don't want to take too much more time, but I would just like to say that while I agree it is hard to change the structure of society and of energy as we have it right now, it is not impossible. And I think that given the fact that fossil fuel energy has not existed for more than 200, 300 years, we have the capacity, we have the technological capacity to change. And this is one of my favorite books. It's called Drawdown. It focuses on the most effective and complete plan done by scientists across the world to combat global climate change. It has really well-built statistics, and it's all based on hard evidence. And it works in types of solutions. And geothermal asks one solution. There's lots of different sections on energy in here that you might be interested in looking into. But based on worldwide establishment of geothermal, it would cost about $155 billion, which would be a pretty extreme cost. And it would save about $1 trillion in total once it's implemented. So I think that there's definitely a big question of how would we immediately, in Illinois, which is a small sector of the world, how would we turn our current energy grid into a sustainable energy grid? That's an important question. But I think when you look at the amount of jobs it would create, the amount of eventual savings that would turn back into the environment, and the fact that it'll impact all of our futures in such a beneficial way, I see it as only a positive. And I would really like for you to see that too, because there are risks, but the benefits are so great. And I really think that we could change history by passing this bill and really be a leader in America. So that's my bet.
I just want, hi, Tom.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. And thank you for taking the time to meet with the group. I think, in listening to everybody's points, and from the health aspect, I see I feel that our society has to decide what we believe in is important, and all these competing needs that we have obviously pose problems, but just when you take a public health crisis that faces us, and we see right now how this impacts healthcare, how this impacts the marginalized, how it impacts our economy. I just feel that if we don't take preventative action for climate change, we're just going to be creating the ultimate public health crisis. When I look across this Zoom screen and I see mostly, our younger women here, it really does concern me because we know that there's so many impacts on, specifically and disproportionately, on women and of women of childbearing age. And that impact on the air we breathe and our water, and our food quality, not just extreme heat, but just like ambient heat. These things, when they are in their childbearing years, if they so choose, as an obstetrician, this is not something that will be in their control to change. They cannot change what they're breathing and what they're drinking and what they're eating. And I just feel like that is a tenuous situation as a healthcare provider for them. And for years, we've known the effects on things like preterm labor and stillbirth and low birth weight babies. And just this past summer, there was a more extensive review of 32 million US births, looking specifically at our pollution and air quality, and as well as ambient heat. And we know that these things are aggravated by climate change. And for me, it's just a very difficult fact to ignore and to kind of not take preventative measures and to almost intentionally move towards. I mean, Illinois, as far as our local actions that we can take, I think those are very important. I think that we've seen that what we do locally matters. It matters in COVID. It matters with wildfires that happen in California, or things that happen in Miami, and the same goes for Illinois. I think that we can make an impact, on our local environment. I was just reading last night because I was curious, but in 2012, they provide the perinatal advisory group identified preterm labor as a major economic strain for our state, as well as suffering for patients, and said in 2012, we should really be doing something about this. And then I guess here we are in 2020 with a JAMA review saying that climate change is an exacerbating factor for specifically that, and not really seeing much that's happened, from 2012 to 2020. It just seems like we are continuing to go in the wrong direction, and we do. I mean, Illinois uses a lot of coal, and I think with CEJA, would like to see us using other energy forms that we can use, and not that are not as detrimental, or even fracking. There have been dose studies on the impact on women and women's health. So I guess I could go on and on, but I just see no choice from a health standpoint to not take action and move away from fossil fuels and accelerate our move towards renewables. So thank you.
I think I'd just like to chime in here. I'm a student, like Heidi said, at the University of Minnesota, and we're a top 10 research institution. And I know at the beginning of the meeting, you said you love reading things from other points of view and you are pretty well read. So if you're interested, I would love to share like loads of empirical evidence with you on the things that we discussed today, whether it be books or studies. So if you're open to that, I would love to share some reading materials on the science kind of behind all this.
Okay.
Before we leave, I think it's also important, Tom, so we have, we know that our lame duck session was canceled because of COVID. There's a decent possibility that, and I think, has it already been canceled, the veto session?
Yes. I mean, the Speaker of the House could reverse that, or the governor could call us in a special session, but.
Okay. So, but we do have, starting at the end of January, a new legislative session.
Mid-January, the new group gets sworn in.
Right, when all the new, and I, it would be cool if that could be something we could share with these young people to see that. And once we're out of COVID, I really hope to take our, youth on a regular basis to Springfield. It's been one of our goals. But I think it's really important. So we've had a chance now, these students have had a chance to express how they feel about an important bill. Are there any bills that you are proposing or have proposed that you would like to see us support?
Well, I alluded to it. Pensions are going to continue to be a drag on the state of Illinois for decades. And every year that we delay meaningful reform, it just makes it less, it gives us less flexibility to address problems like the very ones we're talking about. I mean, it's wealthier countries, wealthier societies, wealthier neighborhoods and states that have the resources to fix their problems. They can put the best minds toward fixing that problem. And those that are less, that don't have the resources are in a box. They're stuck. I talked about water earlier in the call. Do you know what you know about the Flint, Michigan situation? Do you know why they started to draw water out of the Flint River rather than, the Flint River was the source of the main source of their water issues in terms of, just being water that was corroding the pipes that they had there. Okay. Prior to drawing water out of the Flint River, they had purchased water from the city of Detroit. And to save money, because the city of Flint was in such dire fiscal straits, they thought, well, maybe we could save a little bit of money by just drawing water out of the polluted Flint River rather than getting it from Detroit, which I'm pretty sure draws out of the Great Lakes. Okay. So that is just a small example of a state or a city not addressing its fiscal problems and then basically being in a box and being worse off. And so, pensions, in a best case scenario, Illinois is about $140 billion in the red for just its 5 state pension plans. This doesn't even count the police or fire pensions or the other city employees or park district employees or, other municipal employees. The county of Cook, we owe to those retired employees or those soon to be retired employees billions and billions and billions of dollars. And the hole keeps getting deeper. So that's what I continue to try to push for, is addressing our fiscal problems so that we have the ability to address some of these other issues.
Well, I will say, as a league president, and we're one of the largest leagues in the state of Illinois at this point, at this time, I think we're the second largest league outside of the city of Chicago. We definitely, the pension issue is a league issue. This is something that we have looked at, that we have studied. We know it is something that must be solved. And so anything that I can do and our league can do, we would love to be better educated on this topic and to know how we can help that, so that then we can move forward with things like CJA, which we also believe is imperative to our fiscal health, our emotional health, our physical health. And with that, I know that we've gone a little bit over. I want to thank you so much for taking your time. I think it is so important for us to have these open dialogues, not only when we agree with each other, but maybe when we don't agree with each other. When I was a little kid, I always tried to pick fights because I felt like I only understood something once I fought with somebody. I'm trying to be a little better now. I'm trying not to always pick fights. But anyway, so I really appreciate it, Tom. You really show what important, how our elected officials should be serving their constituents, because many of these kids are your constituents.
Yeah, I was going to mention, so I mentioned California, but also look at the German model. So Germany really pushed hard and fast towards renewables. And the consequence was the cost of electricity just it skyrocketed, and so that affects your socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. It moves some of the manufacturing elsewhere to maybe areas where the environmental regulations are not as stringent as in a developed country, and so there are a lot of unintended consequences for. They actually restarted some of the coal-fired plants in Germany because at the same time they pushed for wind and solar, they also started shutting down their nuclear power plants. And so just to maintain base load, they actually, they refired some of the coal plants, which then, was taking several steps back in terms of what they were trying to achieve. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, let's just go in this direction and it's all going to be great. All right, with that, thank you all for the chat, and we'll see what happens coming in January. I'm sure there's going to be a new bill, and
yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Okay.
And keep in touch with bills that you're, supporting, so that we can support it as well. Okay, Tom?
Sounds good. Have a good day, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow.
Good job. I actually have to get on the next call, and after that, I'm just with Jan Chakowski. So hopefully.
We did our best, and I really think, actually, I think that having these kids talk to him rather than a bunch of adults was far more effective with him.
No, kid or not, Bridget, you did awesome.
Isn't she? Bridget,
yeah, I think this was new information, and we just have to kind of, as long as he's open, if he can remain open to learning, there's some
What's
hope.
the name of that book? Drawdown?
Yeah, Drawdown.
Maybe
really
I'll buy it and send it to him as a thank you gift.
It's a thick textbook.
If he says that he's willing to read.
Yeah, that's what I said. I know. I'm like,
passive aggressive. Is that too shitty and passive aggressive?
I texted, I direct messaged Maddie. I was like, is it okay to say that? And I'm like, can I send him studies? Is that fine?
Why not? I mean, he says he reads. He says he wants them. He also has staff who should be reading this too. It's not just him. But anyway, so I really appreciate that you came. I really appreciate the comments. And anyway.
Thanks for this opportunity too. Like I sent it to Maddie and I'm like, you should hop on here. And she was like, this is amazing. So yeah, I'm definitely.
Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you guys.
Good to see you again.
Yeah. Good to see you guys.